Long before skyscrapers and megacities, before paper money or printed books, a civilization was quietly taking shape along the banks of two great rivers, the Yellow River and the Yangtze. These waterways didn't just sustain life, they shaped one of the longest-lasting civilizations in human history. Ancient China did not rise overnight. It developed slowly, layer by layer, across thousands of years. Archaeological evidence shows that as early as 7000 BCE, Neolithic communities were farming millet and rice, crafting pottery, and forming early social structures. These were not yet China as we know it, but they were the roots. The Yellow River, often called China's sorrow, was both a giver and destroyer of life. Its frequent floods deposited rich soil that made agriculture possible, but those same floods could wipe out entire villages. This constant struggle against nature forced communities to cooperate, organize, and innovate. Over time, these early villages evolved into more complex societies. They developed tools from stone and bone, domesticated animals, and created spiritual traditions tied to nature and ancestors. These beliefs, respect for lineage, harmony with the natural world, and reverence for the past would remain central to Chinese culture for millennia. What makes ancient China unique isn't just how early it began, but how continuously it developed. While other civilizations collapsed and disappeared, Chinese civilization adapted, transformed, and endured. And that journey begins with its first legendary dynasty. According to traditional Chinese history, the Xia dynasty was the first dynasty of China, said to have ruled from around 2070 to 1600 BCE. But here's the mystery. For centuries, the Xia existed only in legend. Ancient texts described great kings, heroic engineers, and devastating floods. The most famous story is that of Yu the Great, a leader who controlled the floods not by blocking rivers, but by channeling them, working with nature instead of against it. Yu's success earned him the mandate to rule, and he became the founder of the Xia dynasty. This idea that rulers were chosen based on virtue and ability would later evolve into the mandate of heaven, a core political philosophy of China. For a long time, historians debated whether the Xia dynasty was real or purely mythological. But modern archaeology has uncovered sites like Erlitou, dating to the same period, showing evidence of palaces, bronze work, and urban planning. While we may never know every detail, the Xia represents something crucial. The moment when Chinese society began to think of itself as a unified civilization with rulers, laws, and shared identity. Legend or not, the Xia laid the psychological foundation for everything that followed. If the Xia dynasty sits at the edge of myth, the Shang dynasty stands firmly in history, ruling from approximately 1600 to 1046 BCE. The Shang left behind clear evidence of their power, beliefs, and daily life. This was the age of bronze. Shang artisans created intricate ritual vessels, weapons, and tools that demonstrated both technological mastery and artistic sophistication. These objects weren't just functional, they were symbols of authority and spiritual connection. The Shang were deeply religious. They believed in a powerful ancestral realm that could influence the living world. To communicate with their ancestors and gods, they used oracle bones or turtle shells heated until they cracked. The patterns were interpreted as divine messages. What makes oracle bones extraordinary is that they contain some of the earliest known Chinese writing. These inscriptions recorded questions about harvests, warfare, weather, and royal decisions. This marks the beginning of a written tradition that continues to this day. Shang society was hierarchical. At the top was the king, who acted as both political leader and spiritual mediator. Beneath him were nobles, warriors, artisans, farmers, and slaves. Despite their power, the Shang believed that rule depended on divine favor. When disasters struck or defeats occurred, it was seen as a sign that the rulers had lost moral authority. That belief would soon change the course of history. Around 1046 BCE, the Shang dynasty fell to a new ruling house, the Zhou dynasty. But unlike conquerors who claimed victory by force alone, The Zhou justified their rule with an idea that would shape Chinese politics forever. They claimed the mandate of heaven. According to this concept, heaven granted the right to rule based on moral virtue. A just ruler would maintain harmony, while a corrupt ruler would lose heaven's favor, and with it, their right to govern. This idea introduced a revolutionary principle. Rulers could be overthrown if they failed morally. Natural disasters, famine, or rebellion were seen as signs that heaven had withdrawn its support. The Zhou ruled longer than any other dynasty in Chinese history, lasting nearly 800 years. During this time, China expanded territorially and culturally. But governing such a vast land was difficult. To maintain control, the Zhou implemented a feudal system, granting land to loyal nobles in exchange for military support. Over time, these nobles grew powerful and central authority weakened. This decline eventually led to periods of fragmentation, conflict, and philosophical revolution, an era when China began asking its deepest questions about order, morality, and human nature. And those questions would give rise to some of the most influential thinkers in history. As the Zhou dynasty weakened, China entered a long era of political fragmentation known as the Spring and Autumn period, lasting roughly from 770 to 476 BCE. The Zhou kings still existed, but their authority was largely symbolic. Real power now lay in the hands of regional lords. These states competed constantly through diplomacy, alliances, and warfare. But this was not merely an age of chaos. It was also a time of transformation. Iron tools began replacing bronze, increasing agricultural productivity and population growth. Cities expanded, trade networks grew, and social mobility slowly increased. Talented individuals could rise through merit rather than birth alone, yet instability bred uncertainty. Endless conflict raised a fundamental question across society: how should humans live together? As old traditions failed to maintain order, thinkers, scholars, and advisors emerged to propose new answers. This intellectual awakening would become known as the 100 Schools of Thought, a golden age of philosophy. Unlike anything China had seen before, among these voices, one would come to define Chinese civilization for over 2,000 years. Born in 551 BCE, Confucius lived during a time of disorder. Rather than seeking power through force, he believed peace could only be achieved through moral cultivation. Confucius taught that society functioned best when individuals understood their roles and behaved with integrity. At the heart of his philosophy were several key ideas: Ren, humaneness or compassion; Li, proper conduct and ritual; Shao, filial piety, or respect for one's parents and ancestors. Confucius believed that rulers should govern by example, not punishment. A virtuous leader inspired loyalty naturally, while a corrupt one invited rebellion. Importantly, Confucius emphasized education. He taught students from many backgrounds, arguing that moral excellence, not noble birth, should determine leadership. This idea would later influence China's civil service system. Though Confucius never saw his ideals fully realized during his lifetime, his teachings were preserved by students and compiled into texts such as the Analects. Over time, Confucianism became the moral backbone of Chinese governance, family life, and education. But Confucius was not alone. Other thinkers offered radically different solutions. While Confucianism emphasized order through morality, Taoism took a very different approach. Associated with the legendary figure Laozi, Taoism taught that the universe followed a natural way, known as the Tao. Humans suffered when they resisted this flow. Taoists promoted simplicity, balance, harmony with nature, wu-wei, action through non-action. Rather than forcing order, Taoism encouraged rulers to govern lightly and allow society to regulate itself naturally. At the opposite extreme was legalism. Legalist thinkers believed humans were inherently self-interested and required strict laws and harsh punishments to maintain order. Moral teachings were considered ineffective. Only clear rules and consequences could create stability. Legalism emphasized centralized authority, uniform laws, absolute obedience to the state. While Confucianism shaped culture and Taoism shaped spirituality, legalism would soon shape power. These competing philosophies didn't exist in isolation. They battled for dominance during China's most violent era yet. By 475 BCE, China entered the Warring States period, a time defined by relentless warfare between powerful states vying for dominance. Military innovation accelerated. Armies grew larger, iron weapons became widespread, and new strategies emerged. Warfare shifted from aristocratic skirmishes to total conflict involving entire populations. States restructured their governments to survive. Merit-based systems replaced hereditary nobility. Bureaucracy expanded. Efficiency became a matter of survival. Among these states, one stood out for its ruthless effectiveness: Qin. The Qin state adopted legalism fully. Laws were strict, rewards generous, and punishments severe. While other states debated philosophy, Qin focused on power. By the late 3rd century BCE, Qin armies had conquered their rivals one by one. After centuries of division, China stood on the brink of unification under a ruler who would change history forever. In 221 BCE, after centuries of division and warfare, China was unified for the first time under one ruler, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. Born Ying Sung, he became king of the Qin state at just 13 years old. Through calculated strategy, military strength, and legalist governance, he defeated rival states one by one. When the final conquest was complete, he did something no ruler before him had dared to do. He abolished the old feudal system entirely. Instead of dividing land among nobles, Qin Shi Huang placed China under direct imperial control, governed by appointed officials loyal to the emperor alone. This was a radical transformation. He standardized nearly every aspect of society. Writing systems allowing communication across regions, weights and measures, improving trade, currency, strengthening the economy, road widths, enabling efficient transport. These reforms unified China not just politically, but culturally and administratively. For the first time, people across vast distances shared a common framework of identity. But unity came at a cost. Qin Shi Huang ruled with absolute authority. Laws were unforgiving, and dissent was not tolerated. His empire was efficient, powerful, and deeply feared. Among Qin Shi Huang's most ambitious projects was the expansion of defensive walls along China's northern frontier. These fortifications, built by connecting existing walls, would later evolve into what we now call the Great Wall of China. Hundreds of thousands of laborers worked on these massive structures. The goal was clear: protect the empire from nomadic invasions and solidify borders. Equally monumental was the emperor's tomb complex. Hidden underground near modern-day Shan, it remained untouched for over 2,000 years. When discovered in the 20th century, archaeologists uncovered the terracotta army, thousands of life-sized clay soldiers, each uniquely crafted, arranged to guard the emperor in the afterlife. This reflected Qin Shi Huang's belief in absolute control even beyond death. Yet his relentless projects, heavy taxation, and strict laws created widespread resentment. While the empire appeared unbreakable from the outside, cracks were forming within. Qin Shi Huang died in 210 BCE after ruling for just over a decade as emperor. Almost immediately, the empire began to unravel. Power struggles erupted at court. His successor lacked authority, and rebellions spread rapidly across the countryside. Former soldiers, peasants, and regional leaders rose against the harsh Qin system. Within just 4 years, the Qin dynasty collapsed. Despite its short lifespan, the Qin left a lasting legacy. Its centralized bureaucracy, standardized systems, and concept of a unified empire became permanent features of Chinese governance. The lesson was clear: efficiency alone was not enough. Power without legitimacy could not endure. Out of the ashes of Qin rule emerged a new dynasty, one that blended strength with philosophy, authority with humanity. In 206 BCE, Liu Bang, a former peasant and rebel leader, founded the Han Dynasty. Unlike Qin rulers, he ruled with a lighter hand, combining legalist structure with Confucian ideals. This balance proved transformative. The Han Dynasty lasted over 400 years, becoming one of the most influential periods in Chinese history. Confucianism was adopted as the official state philosophy, shaping education, ethics, and governance. The imperial examination system began to take shape, allowing officials to rise based on knowledge rather than noble birth. This reinforced merit and stability. Under the Han, China expanded territorially and economically. Trade routes stretched westward, forming the early Silk Road, which connected China to Central Asia, the Middle East, and eventually Europe. Chinese innovations flourished. Paper was invented. Advances in astronomy and medicine were made. Historical writing reached new heights. The Han Dynasty didn't just rule, it defined what it meant to be Chinese. Even today, the majority ethnic group in China refers to itself as the Han people. Yet no dynasty lasts forever. By the late 2nd century CE, the Han Dynasty, once strong and expansive, began to weaken. The causes were not sudden, but gradual, building over decades. Corruption spread within the imperial court. Powerful eunuchs and officials competed for influence, undermining effective governance. Emperors came to the throne young or unprepared, leaving real power in the hands of factions more interested in control than stability. Meanwhile, economic pressure mounted. Large landowners accumulated wealth, while peasants struggled under heavy taxation and debt. This imbalance fueled resentment across the countryside. One of the most significant uprisings was the Yellow Turban Rebellion, a massive peasant movement driven by hardship and spiritual belief. Though eventually suppressed, it exposed how fragile the empire had become. Regional military leaders were called upon to restore order, but many refused to give up power once the fighting ended. China fractured into competing territories. In 220 CE, the last Han emperor formally abdicated, bringing an end to the dynasty and plunging China into another period of division known as the Three Kingdoms era. The Han had fallen, but its influence would never disappear. Although dynasties rose and fell, the foundations laid by ancient China endured. Confucian values continued to shape family life, education, and governance for centuries. The imperial bureaucracy, refined over time, became one of the most sophisticated administrative systems in the pre-modern world. Ancient Chinese innovations changed global history. Paper transformed communication and learning. The compass revolutionized navigation. Gunpowder altered warfare worldwide. Printing spread knowledge far beyond borders. Philosophies developed during times of chaos. Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism remained relevant not only in China, but across East Asia and beyond. Perhaps most remarkable is the continuity of Chinese civilization. While borders shifted and rulers changed, language, cultural identity, and historical memory endured. Ancient China was not just a sequence of dynasties, it was an evolving civilization that learned from its successes and failures, adapting without losing its core. From river villages to empires, from bronze tools to paper and ink, ancient China shaped the world in ways still felt today. And in understanding its past, we gain insight into one of humanity's greatest stories of endurance, innovation, and identity. Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe for more.